Good evening and welcome to the May 25th, 2017 meeting of the Kern County Planning Commission, which I will call to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call roll?
Mr. Louie?
Here.
Mr. Babcock?
Here.
Ms. Garcia? Here. Ms. Poole? Mr. Sprague? Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Ovia? Mr. Murphy?
Here.
Thank you. Item B, Commissioner member announcements or reports. Do we have any this evening? Saying no?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we do have a Spanish translation available, so if you could have our Spanish translator come down and make an announcement.
Yes. Would our translator please come down? Introduce yourself to the audience.
Mi nombre es Fernando López. Para las personas que no hablan inglés, solamente español, atrás en la mesa hay unos audífonos como estos. Pueden recogerlos.
Thank you. Okay. Next item is approval of minutes of May 11th, 2017.
Motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item D, cases withdrawn or requests for continuances. I see we have none this evening. This takes us to item E, which is the consent calendar for tonight. Again, I see we have none on the calendar for tonight. Next is item F, which is public presentations. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons desiring to address the commission on any matter not on this agenda and over which the commission has jurisdiction. Would anyone care to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on to our public hearing for tonight. It's item H. Mr. Murphy?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission.
Good evening.
So today marks the fifth in our series of scheduled Kern County General Plan Update workshops. The purpose of tonight's workshop, as with all the previous workshops, is to present your Commission with information that may be utilized in preparation of the General Plan Update and to receive any feedback from community residents, interested parties, or anybody that just wants to provide us that feedback related to the various topics that we are discussing as to what should or should not be included in the general plan and how staff should or should not go about analyzing and proposing those provisions. So tonight there are two elements that we're going to talk about. The energy element, and we're going to look for identifying possible updates to the Kern County's status as leading the state in renewable energy development along with petroleum. And then also we're going to talk about our military readiness element and various land use policies that help identify our future needs in terms of compatibility with our military installations and the surrounding communities. So I think I'd like to start off with the energy element itself. So as your commission is well aware, over all of the projects that you have considered over the past 3, 4, 5 years, Kern County possesses a wealth of existing and potential energy resources. The county's role as a major oil, natural gas, and electricity producer, along with our geographic position at the heart of California and on the boundaries of the state's largest gas and electric utilities consumer population, puts Kern County and its future energy development as a spotlight for the state and as a very significant location for statewide energy resources within California. The Kern County Energy Element is a comprehensive document which identifies critical energy-related issues facing the county. It sets forth the goals, policies, and implementation measures to protect the county's energy resources and encourage the orderly energy development while affording the maximum protection for the public health, safety, and the environment. The energy element, as identified right now, has 3 primary objectives. They include resource management and protection, establishing development standards to provide for the protection of the environment, public health, and safety, and promoting and facilitating energy development. So, as with any subject, these are possible and subject to possible revisions as we go through this update. However, I don't necessarily see any significant changes to those three primary objectives. We are very focused on helping to protect our resource management, developing all the appropriate standards that should be in place that both ensures the development of that resource, but also protects the environment and the surrounding neighbors and residents in which that proposal is located. So what I'd like to do now is kind of talk about the three different energy industries that I'd like to highlight tonight. So the first that I would like to highlight is our petroleum and our oil and gas production. So as your commission is aware, petroleum industry has had a long history in Kern County. And I like to think of oil industry, just because of recent activities, as pre-2015 and post-2015. So just to give your commission background and anybody that may be watching, petroleum industry pre-2015, there was very little from a land use perspective permitting that the county actively participated in. When it came to residential tracts and it came to existing land uses, we were active in making sure that the ability to obtain the mineral resources were protected through things like our drilling island designation and zoning classification. We made sure that there was adequate access and that there were the appropriate conversations between landowner or surface owner and mineral rights owner in terms of both of those entities enjoying the use of their property. All of the actual management of the production was done at the state level through Dogger and through other state agencies. And that is how Kern County had operated for a long history. However, in 2012, a consolidated group of petroleum producers applied to the Kern County Planning Department for an amendment to Chapter 19.98 of the Kern County zoning ordinance that would include provisions that would require local permitting of oil and gas activities within a study area that encompassed most of the southern San Joaquin Valley, which was located in Kern County below our 1,200-foot elevation. So as your commission is aware, that has been come to known as the Oil and Gas Environmental Impact Report. So that was a project-level document that looked at all of the impacts associated with the future production of oil and gas activities within the San Joaquin Valley over the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. On November 9, 2015, at the completion of this 3-year process, this environmental impact report that was prepared by county staff was approved by the Kern County Board of Supervisors, and all the appropriate amendments to the Kern County zoning ordinance were made that now require a local permit when it came to oil and gas production. As part of that environmental document, it also provided the ability for the state to utilize the information contained so that they can have a basis for their permitting that they are required to do. And again, in a nutshell, as the process works now, the county is charged with the surface land use compatibility issues, and the state, and Dogger specifically, is still charged with managing what happens underneath the surface. What this process did is it ensured both a streamlined permitting process and required effective mitigation measures that reduce the impact of the oil industry on the environment. So what I'd like to do now is kind of give your commission a little bit of an update in terms of what that has meant. So since adoption in November of 2015, the county has participated in 2,152 oil and gas conformity reviews. So that is some sort of review that involves a well, a new well, a change to an existing well, but anything that involves a well. And we have participated in 126 minor activity review permits. That involves the accessory structures, pipes and things along those lines, but don't necessarily involve the well itself. Additionally, on our website, in December of this past year, if the clerk could put on the overhead. in December of this past year, we prepared our first annual report that outlined the permits that have been issued to date. And what I also thought would be important is to highlight these mitigation measures. So as of 2016, the oil industry has committed and provided to the county in the form of mitigation over $388,000 for roadway maintenance improvements, over $162,000 for firefighter equipment, over $10,000 for paleontological resources, over $432,000 has been specifically provided to the Rural Crimes Unit, over $30,000 has been provided for mitigation of agricultural land replacements. Over $3.3 million, again, that's $3.3 million, has been provided to the San Joaquin Valley Air District for improving air quality. And over $60,000 has been provided for biological resources mitigation. So again, that's why I like to identify and discuss our petroleum industry pre-2015 and post-2015. So as we move forward, given the recent nature and when this was processed, again, I don't foresee the energy element necessarily wholesale changes to the oil industry as we go through this process. However, we are continuing to implement the project as adopted, and through that implementation, there's always a question of whether minor tweaks need to be made. But again, from the petroleum industry, moving forward, I see that it will involve continual implementation of the oil and gas environmental impact report and all the provisions that were adopted as part of the zoning ordinance. Next, I would like to talk to your commission about renewable energy. So compared to the petroleum industry, renewable energy has a much shorter history in Kern County. Although some would say we've been involved in renewable energy for a long time, clearly the last 4, 5, 8 years, there has been an increased focus in the number of projects that staff has been processing and what we will need to discuss in our energy element related to renewable energy specifically. So again, overall, in terms of wind and solar, this commission and the Board of Supervisors over the last 6, 7, 8 years has permitted and authorized over 11,000 megawatts of renewable energy, both in terms of solar development and wind development. I'd like to talk about solar first. So at the time of the last general plan update, there was limited commercial solar development that had occurred in the county. However, since that time, with the increase in federal funding, tax incentives by the California Governor's Office, and required state legislative actions to promote renewable energy, Kern County has seen an unparalleled expansion of our large-scale commercial solar project facilities. So according to the California Energy Commission, as of October of 2016, Kern County has brought online, again, that's actively producing power, 79 large-scale solar photovoltaic commercial solar projects in the county. Again, this places Kern County as the #1 solar megawatt producer within the state. So moving forward, there are a couple different objectives that I see this energy element addressing and some upcoming issues that and challenges that we face to ensure this continued sustainability of renewable energy. The first is staff, as part of this general plan and potentially as a separate process, but integrated with this general plan, staff is evaluating what I'm referring to as a strategic solar overlay. I know that we kind of talked about this a little bit during the water element presentation. As part of this process, staff is going to look whether or not there are any locations within the county where it would be appropriate to have a solar overlay that basically would authorize solar development to be more of a, I hate using the term by right, but more of a streamlined implementation process. Right now, any solar project that is connecting to the grid is required to process its own individual environmental impact report. Well, given some of the other concerns and challenges facing the county, water is one of them, it may be appropriate that in certain areas of the county, we want to encourage solar development as it has a very limited water use. It would allow for property owners to take advantage of their land, and it might be better suited for solar development. So staff would be looking at going through the appropriate analysis under CEQA to determine whether or not we should have a project overlay where we would apply a specific zoning overlay to land located within the county. From a basic term, what that means, it's similar to a zoning. You know, if you have a zoning that had this overlay, it would be more of a process where a potential developer would come in, they would be required to meet all the existing standards that we've identified, and their permit can then be streamlined and processed, and the project can be built. And would not necessarily have to go through an additional review that comes before your commission and potentially before the Board of Supervisors. Again, so we're not looking to do that wholesale over the county as a whole. There are very specific site-specific concerns and impacts that have to be addressed with every single solar project, which is why the county currently requires the processing of an EIR for each one. But there may be some appropriate locations that we can do a single environmental analysis that would help streamline solar development in those areas even more so than what is required now. So that's one concept that I see as potential moving forward when it comes to solar through this update. A second is future transmission. You know, where is transmission going to be located? Where are the areas of the county that transmission we want to encourage because we have lands that are better suited for solar development and that could better be utilized if there was transmission? I know that I've told your commission this before, but you know, when you think of solar development in Kern County, I also consider, this time instead of a date, we have the valley and we have eastern Kern County or the desert. So primarily in eastern Kern County, you have Southern California Edison, and most of the projects in eastern Kern County are larger scale. That's because that's where the transmission allows for those types of connections. In the valley, on the other hand, which is primarily connected with PG&E connections, PG&E has a different model. PG&E typically encourages and likes the smaller 20 megawatt facilities. So, you know, we notice in the valley, you have a lot less large scale development that covers thousands of acres at a time, but you have a lot more smaller projects that are maybe 80 acres in size or things along those lines. So it's two different models that the county really faces when it comes to our interconnection. And so, you know, clearly transmission drives solar. You can only have solar development if you have the appropriate and the proper amount of transmission to collect those resources. So, you know, as part of this update, staff always and will continue to help identify where we think future transmission needs are best suited to be compatible with our surrounding land uses, you know, based on where we believe solar development is appropriate and where the market is helping to identify the needs. So that would be a second topic that I see. And the third is energy storage and deployment technology. So, you know, a number of our projects now are identifying the need and are requesting that they include a storage component with their project. You know, you can capture the energy when the sun is out. What happens once we capture that? You know, can we store that energy? How long can it be stored? Is there a viable way to store it and then deploy it when it's needed at times that are not necessarily specifically related to when the sun is out? So, you know, that is a topic that is becoming much more prevalent with every project that we have and with all of our solar developers. And I foresee that this energy element will also look at and identify and focus on the future ability to help store energy and then deploy it when it's needed and incorporate that as much of the process as well. From the wind perspective, you know, wind is processed a little bit differently than solar energy in Kern County. Unlike solar, which requires the processing of a conditional use permit for each particular site, in 1986, the county adopted the Kern County zoning ordinance wind energy combining district. So again, from a wind perspective, how the process works is applicants come in and they request a physical change in the zoning to add this WE combining zone district. So that is why you see projects or properties of land that are zoned AWE. Kern County is maybe the only, maybe one of two counties that process wind energy that way. Other jurisdictions utilize a conditional use permit for each turbine. In looking at the resource, in looking at the processing requirements, in looking at the fine micrositing that is done on a project to ensure that the adjacent uses and biological resources are protected. Back in 1986, and staff continues to feel that when it comes to wind, it is much more appropriate to have this WE zone district in terms of the permitting structure. Again, large areas of land are not necessarily zone WE when we go through these projects, but different swaths of lands or corridors that are designated, which again, what that does is it allows project implementation and final analyses to microsite these turbines to make sure that they're located on the most appropriate areas to ensure the protection of residents and biological resources. So right now, this combining district can be applied with zone districts that are zoned A, M1, M2, M3, NR, RF, A1, or estate residential with a minimum lot size of at least 20 acres. Until recently, and again, this is maybe 10 years recently, I guess, 15 years recently, I do not believe that full realization of the county's wind-generated electricity was possible, and it was hampered by a lack of transmission. With the finalization of the TRTP, or the Tehachapi Renewable Transmission Project, that's kind of really what changed, and what was the indicator that really was the trigger that had all these wind energy projects being proposed to staff. Again, what the TRTP is, it's a large-scale transmission line with various substations that run along the Eastern Sierras and ultimately have connections down into LA County and all the way down, they're still working on it, but down to San Diego. Again, that just goes to identify the importance of Kern County in the fact that a project here can help supply power to our residents here, but residents in LA, all the way down to San Diego. We are at a critical juncture in terms of how that transmission and electricity can be moved. And so moving forward, again, we have, if your commission is aware, a couple years ago, we went through a process of potentially defining a wind resource boundary. We went through multiple meetings with the community. We looked at a lot of the studies that have been prepared for the projects that we had, and we looked at possibly developing a boundary, which specifically limited where wind energy can and cannot be proposed. Ultimately, that boundary was not approved by the Board of Supervisors, and it was determined that given all of the unique characteristics of each particular project, it was actually inefficient and inappropriate to try to define a specific boundary that contained where wind should or should not go. And then it was much more appropriate to look at these on a case-by-case basis. So staff has continued to do that. And I do believe as well that that system works very efficiently, and that I do not foresee necessarily identifying a boundary as part of this update to the energy element. Moving forward, I do see continued discussion on infill of the existing wind resource area. That includes repowers, where we take out smaller turbines, and more effective and more efficient and larger turbines are replaced, so that you have, at times, one new turbine can replace 3, 4 smaller turbines. So I do see that as something that will continue to move forward over the upcoming years. I also see a discussion and a focus on potentially finding different land swaps. You know, clearly we've identified the general area where most of our wind projects are appropriate. Within those areas, we have state lands. It might be more appropriate that they be developed with a renewable resource energy, and that a state land or that a private piece of property somewhere else is better designated to be owned by the state. So that is one option that we are always considering and trying to look into is maybe there's an opportunity to swap different lands, because it would be more appropriate that we continue to keep any renewable energy development in this defined area that seems to make sense, and they can work off each other. I see a continued discussion related to the preservation of our biological resources that are located adjacent to these projects. You know, we have taken great strides, and your commission has taken actions to approve turbines and zone designations on lands that we believe are the most appropriate. We believe that we have done that when they were cited. We continue to believe that, but there's always the opportunity to refine our best practices. What are we doing to help ensure that these projects continue to be viable? You know, as part of your board's action and through the work with the different wind industry, we have developed technology that helps detect condors and other species. You know, I look to see that process continuing as part of this energy element, and that a focus is placed on not only new development where it's appropriate, but taking actions necessary to help ensure that the protection of the existing projects and the adjacent biological resources that are next to them. And then also storage and deployment technology. Again, the one concern has always been when it comes to renewable energy is that it can only be available when the energy is available or in use. So when the sun's out or the wind is blowing. You know, what is being done? How are we promoting? What can we do to help promote the technologies that allow that energy to be captured, stored, and then deployed at a time that it is needed, and not necessarily always at the time that the resource is in use. So again, that's what I see from wind moving forward as part of this general plan update. That concludes the discussion on energy. What I'd like to do now is kind of touch base regarding our military readiness element. It has always been the intent of staff and the board to have a military readiness element update, or a military readiness element. If you look at our general plan right now, we have a one-page element. You know, it basically says that we would continue to work on developing a military readiness element. Well, it is our intent as part of this update process to get that done and to make sure that we have that element that can be considered and adopted as we move forward. Now, as I had said, we have the one-page document on our general plan. That doesn't in any way mean that we don't have a very strong and cooperative relationship with our military installations, and that we don't have other means of protecting the actions that take place on those installations and the surrounding communities. So, you know, right now we use the ALUCP, or the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. There are specific sections within that document that outline different provisions that apply to both Edwards Air Force Base and to China Lake Naval Weapons Station. Another tool that we use is the zoning ordinance. And I know your commission is familiar with this document, but specifically what we refer to, and if the clerk could put up the overhead again, is our red, yellow, and green map. So again, what this is this is a map that's been adopted in our zoning ordinance that outlines the various areas in which military review is required for projects. So as you can see in the red, over in eastern Kern, all wind turbines, any communication tower over 80 feet, and any or all structures over 100 feet require review by the military, so they can provide us feedback. Areas in the yellow require that any structure over 500 feet coordination occurs, and areas in the green identify areas that no review requirement is necessary. You know, when it comes to wind energy, we have not ever recommended, and anytime an applicant brings us a project that is located in this red area, we have been very clear from the beginning that we do not believe those are appropriate areas for wind turbines, because there are too many concerns that a project there could impact our military installations. So again, this has been a very effective tool at helping to ensure that both the military is protected from encroaching land uses, but also to provide industries and the public with very straightforward information at the earliest of times. This map has been adopted. We point to it all the time, and anybody that proposes a project in Kern County that has to do with wind energy is very familiar with the red, yellow, green map, as we call it. The other tool that has been utilized is one that has not necessarily been adopted by the Kern County Board of Supervisors, but in which we are an active participant in. And this is the R2508 Joint Land Use Study. So there are two of these joint land use study areas in California. There is this one, and then there is the Beale JLUS located up in the Bay Area. So a joint land use study is a collaborative planning effort between the active military installations, surrounding counties, cities, and other affected agencies. The JLUS process is funded by a grant from the Department of Defense Office of Economic and Adjustment. So again, in Kern County, we have the R2508 joint land use area. And as you can see this map, Kern County consists of the southern west portion of the overall plan area. But again, it is located in the area where both Edwards Air Force Base and then a portion of China Lake, which are located in Kern County. So again, the purpose of this plan is to address and provide a study area that comprised of all lands beneath the R2508 complex or in the vicinity from the three participating installations. The counties that are located, or the jurisdictions that are located within this area, include portions of Inyo, Kern, Los Angeles County, San Bernardino County, and Tulare County, and then the cities of California City, Ridgecrest, and Tehachapi. So again, the purpose of this plan specifically is to provide an understanding, to promote collaboration, and to identify recommended actions that help to ensure the long-term viability of the surrounding base and its missions. When this process, this document was last updated in, I believe it was May of 2008. And at that time, staff actually served as the lead agency in terms of helping to process that project. We have been in contact with our military contacts, and they have asked and indicated that an update to this JLU study is something that they are wanting to pursue at this time. And I fully anticipate that the county will be just as active as we were before. And it works very well that we can go through that process simultaneously while we're updating the general plan, as the information that's identified now can be included for both the updated JLU study, but then also any appropriate policies, objectives, implementation measures can also further be incorporated into the Kern County General Plan, and it will provide a great foundation for actually establishing and creating a military readiness element that we can incorporate as part of our general plan for this year. So with that completes staff's presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions your commission has, and when it would be appropriate, when you're ready, I'd be happy to provide the recommendation by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Commissioners have questions at this time? No. Could I see a show of hands of how many people would like to address the commission this evening? Okay. We're going to set the timer at 3 minutes per person. Please make your way up to the front so we don't have to wait on you to come to the podium. When you come up to the podium, please state your name and spell your last name for the record. So please come on up.
Good evening. My name is Julie Solis, S-O-L-I-S, and I'm a valley fever advocate. I'm here because I noticed in the general plan you guys have not had a focus on valley fever, and we are in an epidemic. I've never done this before. I'm an advocate. My husband is dying slowly with valley fever in his brain, and as an advocate, not one single day goes by that I do not meet a Kern County resident that was newly diagnosed that in their search came across me. That includes Cheryl's mom I met today is dying in Truxton, downtown. They can do nothing for her but keep her comfortable during her death. The average cost of a patient with valley fever is $50,000. My husband's costs have been over $1 million to date, and he's only 42. With taking that average cost last year in 2016, there were 1,905 cases of valley fever. We're talking about millions of dollars. In the incarcerated rate is even higher. There were 2,732 prisoners in 2013. They spent over $12 million for guards, $9 million in hospital fees, and over $2 million in antifungals. So I asked you, please, if there's a way that I know money is tight, but lives are at risk here, and there's no awareness. We have no awareness whatsoever. Lately, along with assistance, we got billboards. I've been requesting them for a while. We have gotten a couple billboards, but they're scarce and in between and hard to see. And so we really need to implement some sort of a plan in our community, whether it be through our educational system. They used to teach about valley fever 20, 30 years ago. We do not do that anymore. I meet kids on the track team that half the track team was ill this year with valley fever. So I really feel that, especially with this climate change that's happening, the occurrence of the climate change is also happening, affecting the valley fever rates that we have. So I'm not really picky on how we can do it, but I would be of assistance. I used to teach, but now I stay home taking care of my husband. But I can definitely, help with find resources and way that we can advocate and let our residents know. But every single year, Kern County, I know our motto is keep growing, keep growing, keep growing, bring in the money, bring in the people. And that's all good and fine. I want us to grow. But at the same time, all these people and companies that we're recruiting to move here and live here, they also need protection of this deadly disease that they do not know of. The work, when they transfer them here, they do not tell their employees. I met a lady that moved here from State Farm about 15 years ago, and on her deathbed, they found out that it was valley fever. So I'm all for the growth. We definitely need it, but we also need awareness for people that are breathing this deathly dust. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Gordon Nipp, N-I-P-P. I am the vice chair of the local Sierra Club chapter. Mr. Murphy said that the planners really didn't anticipate making a lot of changes in the energy element relating to oil and gas issues. I would like to urge the planners maybe to rethink that a little bit. In order to combat climate change, science says that we should be transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels. And this is where the world is destined to head in the future. Whether we like it or not, in Oil Central, Island of Denial, Kern County, the world is changing around us. More and more folks are beginning to care about leaving a livable planet for future generations. For example, state law requires that statewide greenhouse gas emissions be reduced to 40% below the 1990 level by 2030. It seems clear that future California will not be going full speed ahead with oil and gas production and use, and that's something the county should prepare for. The staff report for this workshop admits, and I quote here, "The rise and fall of petroleum prices creates dramatic swings in the county's economy, and while the county is vulnerable to short-term fluctuations in the petroleum industry, it is even more vulnerable in the long run. Let's not stick our heads in the sand. Let's address this vulnerability by including a standalone climate action plan with policies, implementation measures, and performance standards that make it clear how the county intends to decrease focus on oil and gas production and increase focus on more reliable, clean, renewable energy production." One of the objectives of the existing energy element is promoting and facilitating energy development. Since science says that we should be transitioning away from the use of fossil fuels, this objective should be revised to say promoting and facilitating clean, renewable energy development. We're facing a world with inevitably decreased reliance on oil and gas, and a realistic county needs to adjust to this future. The general plan should include a standalone climate action plan with just policies that focus on clean, renewable energy development. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Patricia Leal, last name Leal, and I work as a policy advocate with Leadership Council. And tonight I would like to express some of my ideas and thoughts in regards to the staff report. As we continue to update the general plan, it is critical that the county incorporates strong policies into the energy element to facilitate and incentivize the development of alternative energy resources with fewer human and environmental impacts. This includes policies to support and accelerate the county's shift away from dirty energy development to clean energy technologies, such as wind and solar. It is imperative that the county take a system-wide approach that assesses opportunities for clean energy development and energy conservation options that reduces residents' and businesses' energy expenses. These options range from incentives and support for efficient heating and cooling systems, community solar panels, low-flow toilets, home insulation, or electric vehicle charging stations, targeting low-income households and communities in particular, to the creation of green jobs located in alignment with the housing and transportation planning. Low-income residents often pay significant portions of their income on expensive electricity bills. As weather patterns continue to become more extreme as climate change progresses, residents' utilities costs will likely continue to increase. The energy element should build in strong policies to assure affordable, reliable, clean, and renewable energy sources in the county's communities and the most vulnerable communities in particular now and into the future. And I'll go ahead and submit a comment letter, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bring it up to the clerk.
My name is Catherine Clawin. That's Klawunn. I work as a healthcare professional, and I'm a member of the local Sierra Club. Here are my comments pertaining to the energy issues. There is no need for Kern County to be the poster child for the worst air in the state, if not the nation, with respect to ozone and particulates. We cannot afford to continue watching our air worsening at an alarming rate, taking little action while our kids' and grandkids' health is at stake, let alone our own. I've worked as a healthcare professional since the 1960s and moved here over 30 years ago with scant respiratory problems. Since moving here reminds me of being a 2-pack-a-day smoker, what you run into with your lungs. more days of flu. It takes a lot for me to stay home from work, but I've had more stay-home days. At this point, my primary doctor gives me an inhaler when I come down with winter, the guck. It's so much worse. I work with all ages of the public. Young children and the elderly are among the most vulnerable. And my first doctor told me when I came to Bakersfield that I was catching everything that was Bakersfield, and I would become immune to that. I could take issue with that. Our two major pollutants, ozone and fine particulates. When I go out at night with an LED headlamp, I'm surrounded by a snowstorm. That's how much you can see the particulates. Sources of bad air, which we know, include diesel engines, methane from mega dairies, oil and fracking pollution, and ag spraying, among other things. Many of these activities are vital to our economy, and yet there is questionable accountability for how toxic they are to our population, let alone others. Many of these activities, while destructive, can become less toxic. They can be more monitored. It reminds me of the Wild West here. We are the people who are paying the price, however. There's a gun battle going on at high noon before our eyes, but the bad hombres with black hats are shooting at us on the sidelines with AK high-powered pollution rifles fitted with infrared night scopes. Do we want this to continue for our children and grandchildren? I think not. Part of the solution at this time should be a standalone climate action plan. The Tulare County Climate Action Plan, which I looked at briefly online, is 172 pages, and I don't think they breathe the cocktail that we do here. So a separate standalone climate action plan should be created and implemented to include encouraging energy efficiency in our new construction and existing housing retrofits, solar and wind power, giving better incentives and support thereto, electric and standard vehicles, better access to recharging stations. New gas stations and commercial projects should require fast-charging EV stations. Incentives to replace and reduce emissions from older model gas-powered vehicles. In at least a standalone separate climate action plan will help focus the community on this issue, vital to our current and future health. Global warming, the part of which is produced by us, has been highly documented. The increasing frequency of California forest fires also worsens our air quality. We can take steps to address these problems. Please create a separate climate action plan. Do not bury these problems in the general plan, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name is Steve Montgomery, like the capital of Alabama. I'm the chair of the Kern chapter, Sierra Club. A couple of years ago, I was joking with my East Coast relatives about our 6 days of winter. We've experienced exceptionally warm winters with the few days we could actually call cold. Fog that used to be the hallmark of this valley has gone away, and even with the rain this season, we really haven't seen that much fog. Record-breaking high temperatures are fairly routine as each subsequent annual average temperature beats the record set by the previous year. This behavior of the climate speaks to the idea that we need to give more serious consideration to the changes we are experiencing than we do now. Climate changes we are experiencing will have having a detrimental effect on our agricultural industry, among other factors of our society. It would behoove us to take this matter a bit more seriously than we have in the past. The way to do that is to incorporate a specific climate action plan in the general plan as the best vehicle to manage, identify, and establish policies that will facilitate reducing our growing community's effect on the local climate issues, including the sources of carbon emissions. This matter goes hand in hand with the clear need for taking more aggressive steps to address our poor air quality. It does us no good to sit on our duffs and blame the Chinese or San Franciscans for our bad air. We need to face head-on the job of identifying and dealing with the various elements that are damaging our air. Easy steps include requiring electric vehicle stations in commercial developments. For the growing number of motorists who drive plug-in electric vehicles, this would have the added benefit of facilitating more commerce as they wait for their vehicles to charge. A motorist driving an EV can feel confident that when they want to stop to shop or perhaps eat, they'll have a place to plug in. Regardless of the fact much of our economy is dependent on petroleum facilitating and encouraging the use, excuse me, the use of non-carbon renewable energy won't tank our local industries. Oil, because of its many uses and because no change happens in an instant, will be here for part of our economy for a very long time. That said, it will do us no good to sit on the wrong side of history and look nostalgically backwards to yesterday's solutions to solve tomorrow's problems. Let's get in front of this thing and put a climate change plan in place, and with those policies, make it easier for those choosing non-carbon energy options to make that choice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Harry Love, L-O-V-E, which is a nice way to spell it. I am the conservation chair of the Kern Audubon Society. I wish I had a bird on my shoulder right now singing a song because I would get everybody's attention. In 2014, the National Audubon Society identified 314 species of birds that will be affected by climate change. And those are the birds that you and I like to hear. So I think what is important, you've heard tonight, and which I will give you an informal written presentation, is the fact that birds, we love them, but they are also indicators of our lives. You all have heard of the canary in the coal mine. Well, we have birds right now that are showing what the effect of climate change is occurring to them. I think that you've heard speakers tonight talk about Kern County being unique. You had a presentation from Mr. Murphy about our energy resources that are fossil fuel related, but also about those that are renewable. But I think something else we mentioned here is the fact that we have one of the lowest costs of living in the state. That's a plus, except it also brings people here who would like to enjoy that low cost of living. And with that comes air pollution, traffic, and those things. Therefore, I think, as you heard tonight, a community action plan, a climate action plan is needed. The key word there is action. It's not a list of things to do, it's the things you need to do. And I think one that is specific, identifiable. There are two other sources I'd like to mention. There's an institute for local government, founded in 1955. It's located in Sacramento. And they are guidelines for counties in this state in how to develop a general plan. The Office of the Governor has a secretary, Michael Rodriguez, and he is the Secretary for Environmental Protection. And he has issued a document related to a climate action plan. Therefore, and finally, I think we had a speaker tonight talk about Tulare County, our neighbor to the north. And we do have a lot of things in common, but they have a very substantive climate action plan. So as you hear other speakers tonight, you can see that we would like to see action within our general plan, that we're going to improve the air, and we're going to do it because we have specific guidelines that this group, the Planning Department, and the Board of Supervisors will adopt. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Oh. Ma'am. Clark. Madam Clerk, he's got something.
Hello, good evening. My name is Gustavo Aguirre, A-G-U-I-R-R-E. I'm with Central California Environmental Justice Network, and also the co-chair for Building Healthy Communities Environmental and Recreational Action Team. I'm also a Central Valley member for the Tracking Implementation Working Group out of the California Environmental Health Tracking Program. And then also a recent panelist at Center for California's Department of Public Health Climate Action Team Public Workshop, as I was speaking about dimensions of oil and gas and Finstein's communities. Some of the comments that I want to make today are specifically around the energy element. So as you all know, the State of the Air, which is a report that comes out by the U.S. Lung Association, reoccurringly shows that Kern County, specifically Bakersfield and Arvin areas, hold the position for having some of the worst air quality in the state and in the nation over and over again. And that just goes to show some of the factors that we have here locally. And as you guys know, some of the factors that we have here that contribute to the pollution and the contamination is the traffic. Highway 99 and Highway Interstate 5 run right through the middle of the Central Valley, contributing to some of the worst air pollution in California. Geography, our geography, we're in Central California's valley that creates this perfect atmosphere to hold and contain the pollution that is created by the industry here. The third indicator of pollution that we have is industry. We have, the the three biggest oil fields in the state of California. We have some of the biggest agricultural land, and we're the number 3 county in the state of California that uses the most fumigates and pesticides, contributing to this pollution. We have mega dairies that are producing methane releases at a higher amount, and then we have pollution that is made by the public, right, by the general everyday living, and what seems to be this kind of famous narrative here is this national and international pollution that comes from outside of California, the Central Valley, that really sets an incorrect thesis that states that the pollution comes from outside, when we have some of the biggest industrial and exploitative industries that actually create the pollution here. And then someone did touch on wildfires. Wildfires also create a lot of the pollution that we have here in California. As you guys may or may not know, in the 1980s, the West Management created a report that stated where should we put intrusive and extractive industries, and they showed that there are several indicators that you need to target in order to create or to place these polluted industries. One is look for places in California that the majority of the people work in labor, right? Whether it be agriculture, oil and gas, manufacturing, etc. Look for locations that have a high concentration of religious folks, especially Catholics. And then also look for folks that have a low education kind of basis, right? And so when we talk about disadvantaged communities across California that are set by Cal Enviro Screen, we look at communities that I personally work with, which are these rural, low-income communities, communities of color, communities of migrant farm workers. And these are the communities that are most affected by this pollution and by this air quality. And lastly, some of the stuff that I would like to note from the energy plan. I know Mr. Murphy said that there's no significant changes that could occur.
Sir.
I think the very first, I'll wrap it up here. I think the very first comment that should be changed is the fact that resource management and protection is the #1 item. When public safety, public health, and the environment should become first. Before you start talking about extractive industries and how to manage that, we need to start talking about public health first before anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker, please.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Rosana Esparza. My last name is spelled Esparza. I'm a gerontologist, also specializing in environmental health. I'm not going to say to you anything that you don't already know. What I am going to do is I'm going to invite you, all of you, to come with me on some of my field work, because seeing is believing. We have a big problem in this community, and that is there's not enough people that are seeing what I see, what my colleagues here see on a daily basis. You can't possibly know because you're busy in other types of work. Those of us who are in the field working with environmental impacts and issues see the impact of what energies and lackadaisical approaches has done to our community members, our communities, our parks, our highways, our air. Currently, I'm working on a study, an air and water study. And even though we've given millions of dollars to the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, we still rely on small foundations to provide us with the necessary startup costs to do on-the-ground monitoring of air and water. Small organizations shouldn't be bearing that burden, particularly when the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District is receiving as much money as it does. I invite you to come with me to go on my rounds when I'm checking spec monitors. What spec monitors do are very simple. You install it into a plug, electrical outlet, and you watch the dial jump from 0 to 10 in some of these fence-line community homes. And I'm talking about inside their home. Outside, we can't even get a monitor to work on the outside. We have to use other types of equipment. And that's in people's homes. And I'm not just talking about fence-line houses. I'm talking about people right here in this community, right here downtown. We also use catfish monitors. Both of these equipment were developed at Carnegie Mellon, and we are using the equipment because we need it, because we don't have the funding that the Air District has. So we have to go outside of this community to other universities and researchers and essentially ask for them to help us in this community. I invite you to come with me so that you can see for yourself what people are drinking, what's in the water, and when you explain to people why is that monitor jumping and spiking, you look at them and you explain to him, that's small particle pollution. That's 2.5. That's stuff that's getting way deep into your lungs, and it's never going to get better. I implore you. I'm very easy to find. My email address is rsparza.usc@gmail.com. Send me an email, please. I'll be out all next week in the field installing more monitors. I want you to see for yourself, because seeing is believing. And unless we do something to include this climate action plan, we're missing a huge opportunity to do good in this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Margie Bell, B-E-L-L. I'm a retired teacher and very much interested in future technologies. I'm not a scientist, I'm an English teacher, but I think anybody can understand the potential there is in clean technologies. It's the wave of the future. Solar, particularly, that we know is cost-effective and very beneficial, especially when it's on residential houses. I do not have solar on my house because I'm in a circumstance right at the moment that I can't afford it. My bill sometimes is $800 a month during the summer. And I wish there were a way I could have a source of cheaper energy. And I'm sure there are many, many people in Kern County who cannot afford $800 a month from PG&E. I favor including the global warming element in the general plan because we need clean energy. We need cheap energy. And I think the people of Kern County deserve cheap energy. We're really on the wave, on the cusp of the wave, the starting of a wave of all these new technologies. And I know adjustment is difficult and is necessary. Kern County could be the center of the solar revolution, not just because of climate change, but because solar is clean and cheap. We should all be running all of our county and city buildings on solar cells. I'd like to know also how many of our tax dollars are spent towards paying high electric bills because we're not getting on board fast enough with the new solar technology. We should also be encouraging businesses, senior centers, hospitals, police stations and substations, fire substations and nursing homes, and senior residence centers to utilize cheap, clean power sources. The best use of solar panels is on private residences where citizens can lower their energy bills to almost nothing. And a byproduct of these new technologies is cleaner air, reducing the incidence of lung cancer and those many other diseases we've been talking about. Just one more thing. There is a moral imperative here. And our county needs to look at this issue very carefully. Climate change is real. Our coasts are being threatened. Our forests are being threatened. And we need to take action. We need to do something to contribute to a positive effect to the climate. And if we don't, we're in a lot of trouble. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Jason Alvarez. I'm here to express
Could you spell your last name, sir?
Alvarez.
Thank you.
I'm here to express my ideas for the energy element as a young adult that wants to see my community grow. I want to see a plan that the county ensures and invests in renewable energy. I want to see solar energy light poles in parks. For example, the Rexland Acres Park will benefit and be improved more with solar energy lighting, and to have access to electrical buses and ensure a healthy environment. One way this can be done is by creating jobs that will benefit the youth from them building these lights and buses, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
I'm Eddie Lane, Eddylane. I live in Rio Bravo 2. I'm in Supervisor Gleason's district. I'm also a member of our local chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm asking that there be a separate standalone climate action plan based on my experience here in this county of over 30 years. 15 years ago, some of us who are older remember 15 years better than others, I was teaching at General Shafter School, 6th grade. And then in those days, it was before this stuff ruled us. In those days, we found out about foggy day alerts from the radio or television. Well, I knew that we were going to have a 2-hour delay, or I thought. I got to school. In front of the school was a big sign said, "School closed today." That day, the school was closed because of the fog. That school has not been closed because of fog in years. Climate change is real. And unless we come to terms for it and plan for it, we've got our heads in the sand. So let me encourage us together to create that separate climate action plan, a separate document. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Renee Donato Nelson, Nelson. I'm going to just make a few quick comments. One regarding the status of the litigation on the oil and gas ordinance. I know that there were a minimum of 2 or perhaps 3 lawsuits that were filed immediately after that. So it would be interesting to know where that stands and how that's affecting if there are any changes that are being either considered because of settlements. In addition to that, you mentioned $3.3 million from that ordinance was given to the Air District. How much of that was used to mitigate pollution here? What's the status on that? Regarding solar, commercial solar, I think it would be imperative of us to keep it out of prime ag. I know that there's designations for ag, but not an overlay for the solar. That might be something to think about. How much total energy is used in the county? How much of it is exported? I want to second the Valley Fever focus. I think that's a critical thing we have not addressed, to my knowledge, beyond Regulation 8, which is dust control, and the Air District's documentation. So that would be something that we do need to look at. as a health and safety issue. EV charging stations need to have some standards for that. If you did the climate action plan, that would be a great place to put that. And climate action plan, I'm not familiar with that particular plan, but I love the idea and I'd like to participate in creating it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Marian Vargas, Vargas, and I am here tonight in support of a standalone climate action plan as well as an environmental justice element for our updating of our general plan. I appreciate all the detail with regard to the comprehensive issues that justify having a climate action plan, a standalone plan, and also share concerns related to environmental justice issues that are a result of much of our energy industry. And also, with regard to the environmental justice element, I note that it is mandated by SB 1000 that was passed last year. And I know that those concerns can be integrated into general plan elements and topics, but as I'm looking at the staff report for the energy proposed energy element for this updating of our general plan, I see that there's kind of reason why we need to have the standalone action plan and the standalone clean air action plan and the environmental justice element. Looking at in your staff report, the energy element, it lists the energy element has 3 primary objectives. Resource management and protection is first. Second was establishing development standards to provide for the protection of the environment, public health and safety, and promoting and facilitating energy development. So, those objectives kind of sound okay. I think the second one is really, really important. But then moving along to page 2, you see where it says the energy element update will continue to focus on 4 key issues. The first is to improve and streamline current energy regulations. The second is to increase county monitoring and involvement in state and federal energy legislation. The third is to plan for future energy resource diversification. The fourth is to anticipate new opportunities for development of Kern County's energy resources, including oil, natural gas, geothermal, wind, and solar power. Doesn't talk about electric vehicles or the infrastructure that would support that. It doesn't talk about the construction of solar and retrofitting to make more energy energy conservation kinds of buildings and remodeling. And then it says nothing about environmental justice issues, and it says nothing about establishing development standards to provide for the protection of the environment, public health, and safety. So the 4 things we're going to do in updating the plan this year, it has nothing to do with the second objective, and that is really worrisome for me, and I think that is good justification for us to have standalone a climate action plan that can address those issues, as well as a standalone environmental justice element. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Folks, we've heard plenty of clapping this evening. I'd like to keep the meeting moving along. It's no longer necessary. We understand you're in support of this, okay? Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Suzanne Noble. I am the Director of Production Operations for the Western State Petroleum Association. As you may know, WSPA is a nonprofit trade association representing companies that produce petroleum and natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, and other energy supplies in California and 4 other Western states. We believe it's important to recognize the effects that oil and gas production has on our state and the Kern County community. Oil and gas industry provides thousands upon thousands of upper middle class paychecks for men and women in Kern County, which is why small businesses thrive when the oil and gas industry is doing well. The industry also is one of the county's largest taxpayers, helping to maintain good schools, public safety standards for our families as well here in Kern County. California continues to grow, unfortunately, its energy deficit. We can consistently import more and more energy to meet our energy demand. To avoid an energy crisis, we need to keep working towards a stable domestic energy supply. To protect the quality of life that the energy industry provides to our state and communities where they operate, we need efficient state and county planning processes like this one. We want to thank the Planning Department for all of the work that they put into the general plan update. WISPA looks forward to working together on the energy element, and we'd like to thank you for your time here tonight.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Tracy Leach, L-E-A-C-H, and I'm here on behalf of Kern Citizens for Energy, which is a coalition here in town which represents, well, in our county, that represents thousands and thousands of citizens, business owners, nonprofit organizations, our taxpayer advocates, elected officials, you name it. Kern Citizens for Energy supports robust oil and gas production here in our county and throughout the state. That local oil and gas production is what produces so many of our jobs, reduces our dependence on foreign oil, and increases revenues that our county so desperately needs for roads and schools and public safety. As you all are aware, in 2015, our county approved the environmental impact report on oil and gas production. The petroleum industry's operated in Kern for decades. A very, very long time, and this permitting structure requires the industry to contribute hundreds of millions of dollars for additional environmental safeguards and community benefits over the 20-year life of that program. Just some of these benefits include new air emission standards, reductions in the valley, road improvements for critically needed transportation projects, long-term groundwater sustainability, and of course support for our Sheriff's Rural Crime Investigation Unit, which is very important. The permitting structure ensures oil and gas production continues safely in Kern County. Our planning department, as you all know very well, under the direction of Ms. Oviatt, has no peer in the state of California when it comes to environmental studies for energy, not just petroleum, but we lead the state in renewable projects as well. So this EIR was already prepared in a very public, transparent manner. The science and research that went into that was extensive, and it ensures that the industry can continue producing here in our county. Kern Citizens for Energy doesn't just blindly support the oil and gas industry. We want it done safe and in an environmentally sound manner. Our strong oil industry is a big boost to our community. It invests capital locally, provides those jobs, and keeps our county thriving. The approved comprehensive EIR can be relied on, confidently referenced for the energy element of this EIR. And we encourage you to do that. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public portion of this item this evening. I'll turn to staff first to see if they have any comments they'd like to make.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I rather enjoyed this conversation tonight. You know, I've always felt that anything worth doing is never easy. And clearly, based on the comments we've heard tonight, there's a wide range of thoughts and approaches in terms of how should we go, what should we do, where should we encourage this, what should we do that, and that's a good thing. And it will make for a more robust and a better document in the long run. You know, at times, should you trade one benefit or should you have one benefit at the expense of another? At times, potentially, you know, we make those decisions in our daily lives. Our community will have to make that decision as part of this general plan and everything else. But that shouldn't necessarily be what we strive to. You know, what is the approach that provides the win-win for everybody? You know, what are the things that we can do where we're not, you know, losing part of our economic background and basis just because we want to encourage this benefit, which we do believe is a good benefit and we do want to encourage. Does it have to be one for the other, or can we have an approach that does all and does both? That's the approach that we tend to start with and we want to strive towards. So if nothing else, the work that we do from this point forward is coming from that approach. So at least your commission and the members of the public kind of understand what we're looking to do. You know, how can we have that win-win so that we all benefit as opposed to one versus another, things along those lines. A couple things I just want to make sure I clarify real quick is I did at the beginning of my presentation mention the objectives and that I did not believe that they would substantially change. Again, the devil is always in the details. The objectives themselves were the resource and management and protection of the resource, establishing development standards to provide for the protection of the environment, public health and safety, and promoting and facilitating energy development. Clearly, there could be some changes, but again, that is the broadest objectives. The policies, the implementation measures, the details that we go through, you know, clearly they will be changing. You know, this document was updated in 2004. A lot has changed in Kern County since 2004. So I just wanted to make sure that your commission and the public was aware that when I indicated that, I didn't mean wholesale the energy element would not changing, but rather those three primary objectives would still be the basis by which we started the conversation for creating the appropriate policies, goals, and everything else. You know, the air impacts in Kern County, there's a number of reasons why we have the impacts that we do. And, you know, we're in the situation that we are, and you know, I'm not stating that we do not have poor air quality than I would like or anybody else would like. I have 3 young children that are going to live and grow up their lives here, and I absolutely want to make sure that they are in an environment that they can live healthy lives well into their adulthood. And I have great respect for everybody that spoke tonight, you know, especially the members of the Sierra Club that we have had this discussion with them many times, and we will continue to look at whether or not it is appropriate to have a separate action plan or climate action plan for this document. You know, it's not off the table. That's just not our general approach at this time. And I just want to kind of give a reason why. And again, we will continue to evaluate this and work with them. But again, the general plan is considered the constitution of planning documents. A separate climate action plan may be appropriate at times if you're not updating the general plan. But we are updating the general plan. We have the opportunity here to identify the goals and policies and provisions by which all other plans will be based. So why take that energy and resources to have a separate document when pretty much everything that second document or separate document will do can be done and incorporated as part of the general plan. So that is the basic premise. You know, we're not proposing that these items that they're concerned about shouldn't be analyzed or shouldn't be looked at, shouldn't be included in our environmental impact report, or that we shouldn't have different goals or policies. At this time, just the planning department believes that the better approach to helping to ensure the long-term sustainability is to incorporate them into the general plan as opposed to a separate standalone document. And you know, it's kind of interesting just to kind of hear the comments. And so the projects that your commission hears and that members of the public hear, they're the projects that decide to move forward. You know, they're the projects that an applicant, or at times maybe the county has proposed, but they have decided to process a project all the way through the planning process, through your commission, potentially through the Board of Supervisors. What people forget sometimes is that for every one project that actually processes through the department, I've probably got 20 of them that never process through the department because we identify the goals and policies in the general plan. And we say, I don't think that's a good location. This is a project that there are concerns that we have. So, you know, it's kind of just an interesting take that I think the community as a whole, because they're used to seeing the projects that come before you. But for every project that comes before you, there's many that don't. For example, I had a project today and an applicant that called me up and said, I'm looking at a potentially wind energy project at this location. Here's what we're thinking. And, and I kind of looked at it and we talked and I conferred with our director and responded back and said, this is a bad project. I don't recommend that you move forward. This is a project that I don't believe we will be able to support at this time. All that is based on having these policies and provisions in the general plan. That's what we use to point to identify those things. So, it's just kind of an interesting component that, I just, based on the conversation, I thought was relevant to the discussion, is that for every project that comes before you, that we identify mitigation measures, that we have a monitoring program, that we go through this process, there's a number of them that never get to you. And it's all based on, what does our general plan say? What is our community policies identified? And so that's just an interesting take that I wanted to remind your commission. And then, finally, I just, in the last recent years, it's just kind of interesting to note. So we had a number of comments about the rooftop solar and some other things. This county has provided and encouraged and done everything we can to promote renewable energy within our power. We have modified our zoning ordinance. If you now want to have solar accessory to a use that's established on your property, you don't need to go through a conditional use permit. You need to go through a building permit. The example that started this, we had a pistachio plant. They wanted to offset their energy use using solar. Well, the very first time we did this, they were required to pay money. They had to go through a discretionary action. They had to bring it before your commission, and a conditional use permit had to be approved to allow this accessory use to have solar. Well, once we went through that, we said, well, wait a minute. What does our zoning ordinance really say? We want to encourage this type of development. So we brought forward for your commission, and the board ultimately amended our zoning ordinance to where if you're an accessory solar use and you have an established primary use on site and you want to offset the energy that's used for that site, you need to make sure that it's built appropriately, that you've covered any flood issues and that it's meeting all building codes, but you can do that. And we've had a number of projects that have taken advantage of that because now we've streamlined that process. Over 11,000 megawatts renewable energy. Nobody can even come close in terms of other jurisdictions in that number. The oil industry, $3.3 million is a lot of money. That should not be looked at as an afterthought. Remember, this was an industry that did not have that requirement at all before we went through this process, and now they do. We are looking for the win-win for everybody. And then, finally, just to kind of hit on the note that is most interesting, your commission recommended approval, and the board approved the Grapevine project, which is potentially 14,000 homes at the base of the Grapevine. That project requires that energy be offset with solar use. So to make the statement that we don't do this, that we're not doing this, it's a little bit not necessarily looking at all the projects. We definitely understand where the state is going, the provisions to encourage renewable development. We want to do that when we can. Your commission and the board has taken significant actions to help facilitate those. And I just don't want those to be lost. Again, I believe that this was a very good conversation tonight. I don't have all of the answers right now. We will be going through this process to determine what is the most appropriate, and I look forward to meeting and continue our discussion with all of our community representatives. Because again, I go back to the very first statement, anything worth doing is never easy. And we want to make sure we have a community that does our best to meet the needs of everybody without, if we can help it, not necessarily the expense of any one industry group, individual group of people, things along those lines. So that would be my concluding comments just based on the conversation that we had tonight and any information for your commission. I'd be happy to answer any comments or questions your commission may have. Again, the recommendation on the table right now is to recommend to your commission to take public testimony, to receive and file the letter, and to provide any specific comments to staff. So with that, I conclude any of my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Any commissioners have comment this evening?
I guess I have a quick question for Mr. Murphy through the chair. Is that all right? Sure. Mr. Murphy through the chair. So as I understand your comment, all of the issues that would be vetted and discussed in a climate action plan will be fully vetted and discussed, and if those provisions need to be incorporated, will actually be in the general plan, correct?
Commissioner Lurie, through the chair.
They won't be in a separate standalone document, but those provisions, whatever the issues are, will be talked about, discussed, and rolled into the general plan in the areas that make the most sense. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I believe that to be the case.
Okay.
What I will commit to your commission for sure is that I will have specific conversations with Mr. Nip from the Sierra Club and anybody that he wants to bring to see if he can point out to things that would be in a climate action plan that he does not think would be in the general plan, and we can have that specific discussion. But my general thought is anything that would be in a climate action plan would absolutely be in either the general plan as part of the environmental impact report we're going to be preparing and things along those lines.
Because those issues and the promotion of the energy sector are not mutually exclusive. You can have both. They can work together, right? We know that.
They can. And, you know, this is a topic, and because it was energy, which makes sense, renewable energy, you know, it actually strands a couple different sections or elements. The land use element specifically would be one portion, the energy element. But again, I am not at this point in the belief that there's anything that would be in a separate climate action plan that wouldn't necessarily be in the general plan.
So why is it in your discussions with the people who want a standalone climate action plan, why is it that they want all of those issues to be discussed and debated and then rolled into a standalone plan? Is it because a standalone plan gives it more credibility? Is it because it gives it more visibility to the public? I mean, what is it? What's the reason
Commissioner,
for
through
that?
the chair, I mean, I would, you might want to ask that to Mr. Niff specifically. I do believe that those two things that you mentioned are one thought. They would be a standalone plan. You'd be able to have a standalone plan. You would go through here. It has specific action items that you would go through. It would have a separately contained location where all this is. And again, at times that may be a good thing, but at times, you know, from the capacity where I come from, more so is I'm interested in this project. You know, this is what I want to do. When we talk to people, the first thing we say is go to the general plan. This is where we're kind of establishing that stuff. So trying to identify a separate document is not as visible. So there are two sides to that particular question. I wouldn't disagree with the comments that you had said there. I think it's just a different line of thinking. And just in our experience, sometimes when you add more documents like that, it makes it more confusing as opposed to having some of that stuff tied in specifically to the primary document where we talk about it more so.
Thank you.
I would like to thank everyone that came out this evening. Your input is very valuable to this process. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy days to come here and speak to us. And with that, we need commissioner comment and action on item H.
I'll move to receive and file.
Second.
Cast your votes. Our next item is adjournment.
All ayes.
Thank you.